Hi guys, webbie here from Southern Gaming Collective. Today I'm just going to run you through how to set up a development server for Arma Free on your home computer. What this will allow you to do is test your mission files on a live server prior to actually running it on our live server. The reason for this is Arma Free server works slightly differently to how your mission editor will, in the fact that Arma Free server will load all of its components and any of the backend code prior to the mission file. So this is a good way to avoid issues with compositions or advanced tasking. So okay, we'll just get into it. So we just want to open Steam. Want to go to Library, you just hover over it. You can go to Tools. So what we see in here is the Arma Free server as a tool. As long as you have Arma Free, you can install this. So what we do is we just install that. You can see that you'll need 8 gigs of space, and this is current as of May 2019. So once you've actually installed it, you just right click on it, go to Properties, go to Local Files, and browse Local Files. And what you'll see here is the Arma Free server setup. So there's 3 actual files that don't come in the Arma Free server, and I will provide these as a link. So it's the basic CFG, the server CFG, and the command line. So the basic CFG just contains information for the server on how to transmit data, codecs, and so forth. The server CFG is actually where you tell the server how you want things to load and other internal configurations. And the command line is actually how we start the server up and what and how and what files it needs to actually load. So we'll just get rid of Steam here. Alright, so we'll just go sort of one by one here. We won't go into the basic CFG because that information shouldn't be of any real concern to anyone. The default settings work perfectly okay across the board. So we'll just go straight into a command line because this is one part that is pretty much can create a lot of issues. So the program I'm using here is called Atom. It's very versatile. There's also Notepad++. It's completely up to you. I'm just accustomed to Atom, and I like the dark background because it doesn't hurt my eyes. So what we see here in the command line is this part. I'm telling the server that I want to start with this boot file, which is this one here. Then this profiles one will generate this users folder. So this won't actually be there initially. Once you start the server, it will automatically generate that. It's not any real concern. The 2 main things that it does contain is BattlEye and the difficulty profile. So with BattlEye, just don't bother with it. I'm sure we all know how much of a heartache it can bring. So on a development server, it's just not even worth worrying about. For the difficulty profile, we'll just have a quick look in there. So what we see here is this file, and that's actually the difficulty profile and where things are designated. There's actually a fairly extensive process to setting that up, so I'm not going to run through it. As long as you set it up in your mission file, it should transfer across into the server. I won't guarantee that, but supposedly that's the theory behind it. If you do want to set the difficulties up, just give us a message and I'll give you a hand, or I can provide the file that I run on the servers. On our servers, I have a default set that I use across the board, and they work quite well. So I don't really touch them very much, and it'll contain things like how well the AI can shoot and how smart they are, and generally speaking I have them set to max intelligence because the AI retarded enough as it is, and their shooting is around the 70% mark. So one way to think of it is, in 1 out of every 2 shots may or may not hit you, but 1 out of 3 will definitely hit you. And that's only if you're exposed and if you're kind of just standing in the middle of a paddock waving a flag that's got a big target on it. Right, so that's your profile section. So we just set that up just so Armour knows where to put it. If you don't do that, it'll just generate it directly into this folder, which is perfectly okay too. It'll just do like a users folder. It's completely up to you. I've always kept mine separate. It was a result of earlier programming that you had to do in Armour Free Server. Just force a habit for me. So the next little section here we got is the mod. So when you load your mods, you've actually got to have where you want that mod to load from. So obviously I haven't got any mods located in this folder. So what I actually do is I tell the server that I want to load the mod from this location, and what I'm doing is loading RHSUSAF. So all mods will have an at the beginning in them, and I'll just open up my workshop folder for you to see what I'm talking about. So what we've got here is my workshop folder, and you can see it's in a different file directory. So I'm actually pulling that off a different drive, which will work perfectly fine. Mods aren't a continuous thing. They load them from the file location and then we're done with them. If you do put a mod into the core directory, when you start the Armour Free server up, it will lock all the files. That's the only real catch with it, which shouldn't really be an issue for a mod, as you're not really doing any modification to the mod itself. So if we just have a look down here, we've got RHS USAF, which is what I've got here. So the other part to this is these little quote marks. What the quote marks do is when you've got spaces and so forth in your information in a command line, if you just have no quotes, it will be looking at just this part, and that's all it'll load, and it'll throw errors. So just something to keep in mind. And another thing to keep in mind in your command lines is your spaces. So between each of these there's always a space. So these are kind of like this section, this section, this section, and so on. So on to ports. The port can be set to pretty much whatever you want. When you launch the server, it will ask you Windows will ask you, is it okay to allow access for this? And obviously you want to say yes. I recommend setting it to something similar to that, mainly because the default port is 2302, and that's the actual Armour port, and I try to avoid anything interacting with the Armour port, because it can be a bit funny with the network occasionally. So that's the one section we need as well. And this one here is the config CFG, and we've got the CFG, which is just basic server information about how the codecs work and so forth, which we won't go into. You don't really need to touch this file. It works perfectly okay. I run hyperthreading on my servers because they are all capable of it. It also works very well with the 64 version. It's not a make or break, it's completely up to you. And then the auto init basically tells the server that I want to start this up immediately. So that's your basic command line there. Majority of you will be at one stage trying to use one of their RHSs. So this is basically how you do it. Obviously the file locations will be kind of different to mine. I'm sure you can work that out. It'll just be a matter of clicking in there and saying, yeah, I want to do that. So for me, all I would have done is gone, yeah, I want that file location there. And I just would have pasted that directly into there in front of the @RHS. As you can see, I've already done it. So that's correct. So I've already got that set up, so I'm going to close that down. We'll just get rid of that one. So your next part is your server CFG. So this is where it configures all the little bits and pieces the server needs to know about how you want the server to run. So you can see here the host name is obviously the name that will actually come up in the launcher or the browser or wherever you connect. The server password, when you're doing a dev server, it doesn't hurt to have one because you don't want people joining randomly and kind of screwing with stuff, because they do become public servers as such. Yeah, admin password is exactly as it's got here. Password to log in as admin. Open the chat and type hashtag login password. The other way to get around this is to add your UID here, which I have for me. And this is used when you log in without using a password but binds admin to your UID. So all you got to do to actually log in is type hashtag login. So generally always set it to 30. The main reason for this is we always generally run 30 on the server, and that just helps with any errors that may pop up in the report, and we just try and avoid as many errors as we can. The persistence here we generally have set to 1 because we just want that to continue running. If you have it set to 0, the mission will stop after you've disconnected. Obviously on the server we have it set to 1 because if someone disconnects we don't want the whole server to die. But as generally speaking, you'll always run it at 1. It's more for servers that run single player missions or what have you. Server command password is more for BattleEye commands and external remote commands and so forth, so we don't really worry about that one. I've disabled all the voting in mine because obviously as a dev server you don't really need to have voting enabled. There's the message of the day or the welcome message. So you can see here, you'll see down the bottom left, you occasionally have that thing come up that says Southern Gaming Collective or whatever else it says, and that just rotates every 60 seconds as per that. And what these little ones are is just basically blank spaces, so that says 60 seconds, and then display this, and that just goes in a loop. So essentially every 3 minutes that will display, and I've just set that up purely for information purpose. So your mission cycles here, this is a pretty custom setup how I've got it here, but essentially what we've got here is we've got just a class telling the server that the missions class contains the SGC dev class to run this file. You don't need to change any of this. You can have it named whatever the bloody hell you want, except that you can't rename that. But this part here, you can call it Joe Blogs, who cares? It's just so the server knows how to thread the information. But this part here is actually where you put your mission file name. So if we just have a look back in here, where all default mission files are kept are in MP missions. So you can see here I've got mine in there, and I've actually quite literally just gotten the PBO, copied it, and pasted it in there, and bam. So what that's going to do with in combination with the auto enip that's in the command line, it will automatically load this file, and you'll see that when we boot the server up. So I don't run BattleEye with dev servers for obvious reasons. We don't really need it. BattleEye doesn't really act as a very good anti-cheat, to be honest. It's mainly good for remote management. As we all know, BattleEye can cause all measures of issues, so if we can avoid it, we do. The verify signatures part is where your for your mods. So your mods, each mod comes with a key. So I'll just go over that quickly because it might be a bit confusing. So we've got USAF here. So inside the USAF folder, we've got key. So this key here tells the server that if someone doesn't have a matching key, then they're either using a modified key, an old key, or a hacked key. This is the best way to ensure that people aren't bringing in atom bomb nukes and so forth, or atom bomb keys, sorry, or anything like that. There are a few common little hack mods out there, but if you don't have this set to 2 and you have it set to 0, people can very easily get that in and they can just use whatever they bloody want. but we set it to 2, and when you're on your dev server you set it to 2 so that you know you've got the right mods loaded, you know you've got all the right keys in place. So in regards to that, you've got to have that set to 2, and you've also got to have this key in the keys folder here. So we've got my Armour Free server folder here, and we've got my key from my workshop folder here. So you don't actually cut that. All you do is copy and paste that straight in there. So what will happen now is when the server loads, is you'll see it load up, but RHS USOF is a required mod and it needs the key to allow access. If you don't have the right key, it'll kick you out, and I think a lot of you will find that in the past, if you've had a outdated mod, you'll get kicked and you don't know why. 9 times out of 10 is because of an outdated key or outdated mod. So with each mod release, they obviously update these keys. Not all developers do it. Sometimes they just use the same key, but you'll find with major mods, particularly with ones with skins and custom vehicles and so forth, they will always update the key version. Okay, so that's what the Verify signatures. Anyone gets confused on that, they can flick me a message. The other little part that I wanted to show here was the UPnP. So the reason I've actually put this in here is it makes it easier for you to run UPnP off your computer to route through your router. So it actually creates dynamic ports within your router, which saves you actually having to go into your router and configure ports purely for Armour. It's also another reason I run on an alternate port to the default, because some of the default ports are already set up within your router as vanilla options, I guess you could say, and it just helps you out. Okay, so we'll just get rid of that. So we've got our server CFG, it's all set up. So I'll just get rid of me workshop. So we're back in the Armour Free server folder. So again, that's the basic CFG. I will show you what's in that. So that's what you've got. None of this needs to be changed. You may think, oh yeah, I want to up the resolution or whatever. The issue with doing that is you don't know what people are running on. You don't know if their screens are 800 by 600. You make it bigger, it can distort their game. Majority of the time, people will have their own configurations set up, and this all becomes quite irrelevant. All these message sends and everything are perfectly fine the way they are. I've never had an issue running it as default. Then the other one I'm just going to touch on is users. So in here what we see is the reports. So when you have a problem and the server won't load, the report is your best friend. Well, most of the time. They generally contain all the information that you really need to know as far as errors. Sometimes they don't. It just depends on what type of situation troubleshooting. But what you'll see here is the server loads. This is also another great way to check your command line. If you've got an issue, it probably won't get too far past that point. But you can see that it started to load the server. So when I talked about Armour Free server loading all its components and core before your mission file, as you can see, I'm scrolling through and it's loading all its backend information before you even get to the mission file, and then it loads the mods. So what we can see here is I've actually loaded a mod. You can see it's not a default, it's not an official, but when you don't see this here and you see not found, it means you've designated the wrong spot for the mod. And obviously the server won't load correctly if that's the case. It's just something to watch out for. But in this case, yep, I've got it all set up. That's the information. The server's loading with the RHS. Assuming you've got the key in there as well, everything should load fine. So we've got past all that. It's loaded all its add-on, its components, its core, its threading, everything else, and then we actually get to the the mission file. So when you're doing custom stuff within your mission file, it's already loaded quite a bit of information behind the scenes before it even gets to your mission file, which sometimes can actually create issues for your mission file, and hence why it's good to have a development server to test your own product. So obviously this server's loaded fine, so this one will just come to a stop because the server was loaded, it was okay, and until someone joins, nothing else really happens. The other little part is users. So in here we've got, if you don't actually designate a name for the profile within your command line, it'll just call it whatever your computer name is. My computer name is webbie. And this is what we call the difficulty profile. So if I open this up, you'll actually see that there's absolutely bugger all in it. So this has nothing. This has nothing with the difficulties. But what you can do is you can designate what your custom difficulties are for your server in here. I probably wouldn't get into that until you're a little bit more familiar with Armour Server. And I can give you difficulty profiles, setups, should you like it. We just need to really focus on, and as I said, I run default sets on the server, so we don't really need to worry about it. Okay, so I think we've covered most of the ground. So we've got a command line here. We'll just hit go. This little window will pop up. This is just the way I do it. Some people will have an auto close function and etc, etc. There's no reason you can't close that. It's just to pop up and tell me what my command line is, and to launch the server. Closing that window won't affect the server at all. So what you can see there is dedicated host created. So at that point, Windows will likely pop up and say, oh, do you want to allow this through the firewall? So what you can see is UPnP has failed on my computer. I have dedicated routing inside my computer, so I don't have to worry about UPnP. It was purely for you guys. What you see, it's loaded the Altus mission from the bank. So that's your default folder here for mission files. See, what you can see here is I've got the folder for my Armour mission, and I've got a PBO. I always recommend running PBOs. Bohemia states that you can run it not in a PBO state, but after many years of experimentation, Armour has a bad habit of loading files in order. So what that means is it'll load this, it'll load this, it'll load this, and the problem is that this is actually the file that we want to load. So obviously, if we're doing lots of little bits and pieces and it's not loading the parts in the right order, there'll be an issue on the server, or something won't quite work the way it's meant to, or it'll throw errors in the threads. So we always use that because this is how Bohemia has designed it so that it breaks down the mission file. And obviously, because it's kind of like a zip file, it makes it very easy to port around. And that's pretty much it, guys. Once you've got your Armour free up running, you can start your launcher up and connect to that. If you do have issues, check your firewall. If you still have issues connecting, check your firewall. And if you still have issues connecting, check your firewall. Hard lesson learnt, but I assure you, your firewall is not your friend. Unless someone's trying to hack you, of course. Okay, so thanks for watching, guys. I hope this helps some of you guys out. We can pump out some more community development missions, and thanks for watching.